Is John Krasinski. It is it's late. It's a little bit Hounds After Dark. It's late. Pittsburgh Riverhounds reaction show here. John Krasinski, Colton Coreschi for second straight week to open the season. You are joining me, but this time we're talking about a Riverhounds loss in San Antonio, 2-0. It wasn't pretty. It almost to me it looked like looked like the Riverhounds. I mean, there were signs here and there, but it looked like the team that struggled to get out of the gates at times last year. This team tonight looked a little bit like that. There were some resemblances. So that was just my immediate takeaway, but I'm sure we'll share more. But Colton, what were your takeaways from this loss for the Hounds tonight?
Yeah, a little late for us, but we'll just wait for those 10 p.m. West Coast starts. We'll be
Oh
recording
yeah.
at 1 a.m.
No,
Um,
I don't know. We might have to do the next morning. So
the Yeah, initial instinct is that you are pretty much spot on there. It felt like a step back from last week in a lot of ways. Particularly in the attack, I think it felt
hmm
a lot like last year. There
yeah.
was really no coherent build up. Augie Williams felt super isolated up top, really didn't, got frustrated, was just not getting the service he needed. Um, and the ability to control the ball and turn that into meaningful possession just really wasn't there. Yeah, I mean, if last week felt like sort of how the team developed by the end of last season, this week felt like we were right back, in that Louisville game where we had to switch everything after 30 minutes because nothing was working.
Yeah, I mean, they came out and it looked like they had five across the back, which, we were sort of questioning because they played so well on the road last week. I don't know if Bob looked at the weather conditions maybe, and they was like, oh, let's maybe try to play more direct with the wind to our back, and maybe we can, get something, steal something quickly on the road. It seemed like they were trying to play balls long to Augie Williams, or at least get it into the final third. And then it seemed like when they got to the final third, they were redistributing side to side, and they drew a few fouls, but nothing was going on inside the box really. They really weren't able to generate much.
No, and I wonder, when we were talking initially about the formation and sort of, it was a five at the back, but it was sort of with Jackson Walty slipping in
Right,
that back five and then also
right.
slipping up into midfield in possession, which was interesting because they had three realistically true center backs on the field.
hmm
Osumanu was just playing at right back, which is not typically where he is. And even Biasi is more of, I'd say, a center back than a wing back, but he was playing out on the left wing. And I guess that was an attempt to, you saw Danny Griffin and Robbie Mertz sort of playing behind Augie Williams. And I guess that was a little bit more of an effort to create some space for Junior on the left wing and
hmm
Borgi on the right wing. But it just sort of left the midfield a little barren compared to where they ran that sort of 4-2-3-1 look last week. And I think that showed, and they weren't really able to link up quite the same way with the attack.
Yes, that was absolutely true. The middle just seemed like something wasn't quite there, and they were almost bypassing it. Again, that's something we
Yeah.
saw a lot last year when things really weren't working out and going well. They were sort of bypassing playing through the middle. What was interesting too is that Danny Griffin was pushing higher, even more than last week. Last week it was more towards the end of the match when they it was a different story tonight. I thought he was playing higher. I think that they were doing some different things. Um, but yeah, it didn't seem like they had a touch. I haven't really looked and see how many touches everybody had and stuff. We'll break it all down. I'll have my player grades and takeaways over later in the weekend or earlier on Monday. We'll break it down a little bit more. I didn't see that, but of course so it was 0-0 at halftime. They came out with determined, again, playing with the wind in their face, a lot more on the ground, a little bit more purposeful. They created a few chances. I believe it was Borgi who had a decent look from the right edge, got inside of about 14 yards out, and he it was a terrific strike attempt. Good save by Sanchez, the keeper from San Antonio. That was probably the Hounds' best chance. I mean, there was some crosses and some things here and there, but it never seemed like much materialized beyond that. And then, of course, the goal. Of course, you know, Jorge Hernandez, this is a player who's special in this league, and I think he's a playmaker. So, kind of a deadlocked kind of game. This is a guy who makes a play, makes it is the difference maybe in this match.
Yeah, it was a very clever run from him, sort of diagonal across the back line. It seemed like the center backs maybe got a little bit twisted in communicating as they were passing him over as that ball came over the top, and neither seemed to track him. It was just a moment where they fell asleep, which I'm sure Bob's not going to be thrilled about.
Yeah.
Because once that happens, Eric comes off of his line and goal to try to get to it, and just can't beat him there. And then you have nobody else there. And it's an open net easy goal. Really, I thought the defense overall was 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 actually pretty good on the night. I thought Edrach looked a lot better, a lot more comfortable tonight. I think Walty helped sort of settle him down, dropping in, and it was really just that each goal was just sort of a big mistake, right? Like one big mistake that cost them losing that runner. The second goal, Edrach was backtracking and just simply got beat. 1v1 got turned, got beat, and that set
Hmm.
up the easy cutback assist. And outside of those two moments, I thought they did pretty well. So that was encouraging. But again, yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, that just feels a lot like last year, where the defense was solid, and when we conceded, it was a mistake, and then there was just no way to answer. And that's really Borgi's shot was probably the biggest of the game, for sure. Edrach got a good header that was sort of towards goal, just a little bit over the crossbar off of a corner that was decent. And then Borgi also played a fairly good through ball to Augie Williams on a counterattack where he was running up the middle. It was a step too slow and it ended up being offsides, but that was probably the freest touch Augie had all night moving towards
Hmm.
goal.
Yeah.
They did try to go direct quite a bit, like you said. And last week that worked a little bit better. They found Augie's head a bit more. He was able to nod the
Hmm.
ball on a couple times. Maybe it was the win tonight. It just felt like those passes were a little more off target and weren't able to find him quite as effectively, which just sort of slowed everything else down.
Yeah, so especially in the first half, it just seemed like everything was they overshot everything, and they were trying. They even the balls into the wide spaces and in the corners just didn't take.
Yeah.
It just didn't take. It would just skip in and taken off, and it wasn't pretty. I don't know if the wind was directly going that direction. It's because it seemed like some balls. Uh, got held up a few times. I don't know if it was like a crosswind. That's something I'm sure Bob during the week can shed some light and the players can shed some light on what those conditions were really like. But again, overall, the Riverhounds are 0-1-1. They head home for two matches. They're really gonna need. I mean, it's way early in the season, but nothing better than to pick up, 4 to 6 points in the next two matches. I think, opportunity knocks. You're going to have Hartford, I believe, to open up with, and so that's something that, another team that had to kind of build up from scratch. Going into this match though with San Antonio, both teams, have made whole significant changes in terms of possession. You can see the work in progress a little bit here for the Hounds tonight. Second half though, they were, I think the possession differences were significant between the first half and the second half with the wind at the back. I think it's a lot harder in San Antonio. I think the Hound ended up having the overall possession, I think 52-48 edge, but it was 62-38, I think, in the first half, San Antonio. So again, the weather could have been a factor. Keeping it on the ground in those conditions sometimes is really the best thing to do. So wondering if the Hounds, I mean, I would never second guess Bob Lilly, in terms of tactics, but just wondering about that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's playing through on the ground was what the team struggled with last year, right? And it's there's been some revamp, but it's still a lot of the same guys. I
Hmm.
think this is where, you brought in a guy like Borgi who seems to get into pretty good spaces, find some openings to have the ball sort of advance to him and then do something with it. I am a little bit surprised that given how the sort of two DM system worked last week pretty decently, that you didn't
Hmm.
see Walty and Griffin sort of back holding up, distributing from there, and maybe see somebody like a Charles All, who's really that's his strength, is getting a little bit more forward, carrying the water, sort of finding the forwards. I'm surprised you didn't see a little bit more of that. But yeah, Bob can probably shed some light on that during the week in the build up to the game against Hartford. And I would suspect that the weather probably had a lot to do with that. I think it made it difficult. I think, I know the Hounds are still dealing with some injuries, so there's definitely, player availability and where guys are comfortable that factors in there a bit. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think you're coming into this 2 game sort of homestand. Hartford's going to be coming in off a short week. They have their U.S. Open Cup game on Wednesday because they enter in the first round this year.
Right.
So they're going to be on 3 days rest. We'll have a full week's rest. I think I mean, that feels like a must-win game to me at home. I'm sure Bob feels that way about it.
Yeah, I think everyone, have to be a little bit of a sense of urgency with this coming back home. And you mentioned the injuries, 4 players, including Charles All, who you mentioned,
Yeah.
Bertrand Jacqueline, Perrin Barnes, and Bradley Sample. So that's 4 players who, I know Bradley Sample, you want to possess. Barnes, on the outside, maybe an outside back that you could utilize, and all, of course, for the attributes you mentioned, and then of course Jacqueline. Jacqueline, I think is potentially that missing piece in those spaces. Borges, I think, showing some good things, but that's maybe it's good that Borges getting this early experience, and he's right now in the depth chart he's above Jockerson. I mean, Bob will want his even a top light player like Berton. He has to be fit and he has to be on top of his game to break into the starting lineup. So that will be interesting to see how quickly he comes back, and if he comes back as a starter or does he come off the bench. But that dynamic where he could be, you know, free up because we saw it tonight. Augie Williams is drawing defenders, and I think one of the things the Hounds were doing was, they were so concerned about the Hernandez and Agudelo combination. Agudelo taking up bodies as well, the big body former U.S. men's national team player and an MLS player there. He's a little older now, but he's still a player that you still have to mark up, and Hernandez floating around underneath him. The Hounds don't seem like they have. I think that's the question: is how is all that going to sync moving forward? And so Berton could be a playmaker on one of the wings. I think that maybe frees up Robbie and Danny and some of the other players, maybe some of these younger players, All and Borgie and Bradley Sample. I think the Hounds are still a work in progress as far as that goes. But I don't know if they'll reach that full potential without Berton in there. So that's something we're going to have to wait and see. Hopefully his hamstring gets better soon.
Yeah, that's always a touchy one. I'm so sure that Bob's going to work him in cautiously because you'd never want to just aggravate that. It's so easy to re-aggravate. But yeah, I mean, he's got that danger out on the wing that helps spread defenses out, free some space up in the middle, which is where a lot of our attacking talent is centered. So I think he will be a pretty key player to get back in and see him working with Augie Williams. I think the duo, those two will play off each other very nicely.
Very, very much so. And well, so we wrap this up tonight. Obviously, a 2-0 loss, hanging heads for the Hounds to come back to Pittsburgh, but a lot to play for, a long, long, long season ahead. But let's just wrap it up with man and moments of the match. I'll leave it to you, Colton. Your man and moment of the match. Man, I'm thinking we're trying to focus on the Hounds, but I'll leave it to you here.
No, I'm gonna go with the Hound. I would say man of the match for the Hounds. Hmm, I'll give it to Sean Suber. Like I said, I think the defense was a bit better. I think he was a pretty rock steady presence back there. He made a couple of really key blocks to help Eric out on some of the early chances for San Antonio. And I think when you have a more inexperienced center back partner like sort of Edrach, you kind of need a guy who's been back there before to help him along. And I think he's done a pretty effective job of doing that and providing some stability back there. Um, Moment of the match, I will give to Borgie down the right wing getting that shot off. I think He got the ball at his feet. He was in sort of a 2v1 there, made a very clever, quick little move that showed off what I think is his best skill set, which is just like quick 1v1 moves to get into a little bit of space and ripped what was really like a powerful shot.
Yeah.
You take those kinds of chances and they tend to get rebounded back into play and provide opportunities for other guys. That one happened to be parried out for a corner, but it was very much the right idea.
Yeah, I was looking at Borgie too, could potentially for my man of the match. Obviously, the only shot on target. He did create something for himself, so that's something that, to me, the Hounds needed a little bit more of tonight. A little concerned, while I mentioned that, I am a little concerned about Augie Williams not being able to generate more shot attempts in the first two matches. I mean, really, it was just the one chance the other night last week, and that was, I mean, obviously an opportune moment. So obviously, moment of the match is going to be, it comes down to potentially comes down to Eric Dick. Can he get to that ball before Hernandez? Hernandez, that's just a brilliant little play, obviously, to it. The commentators had said it was off his chest, and it sort of was, but he kind of used his shoulder, like kind of used that shoulder to kind of lean it away, steer it away from Eric Dick and to the right side for himself. And then obviously there's nobody. Once he got around them, he just passed that ball into goal. But again, that's one of those great players make great plays, that make differences, make a difference in games, and that was an example of that. So hopefully for Riverhounds fans, they'll see Augustine Williams, do a few of those that make differences. Maybe Berton, maybe a few others, Robbie Mertz, and some others make plays like that as the season goes along. And it's a tough way to wrap up the first 2 weeks 1 point. It would have been, I think they would have been happy with two or four, somewhere in there, but this is where they are. They have to they're still a work in progress, and I think this is where we are looking at this team heading into week 3.
Yeah, certainly. I think you covered off on it pretty well there. I think Augie Williams is capable of those moments. I think we saw him finish that opportunity that was not an easy opportunity last week, and he's got that quality. Hopefully we can see him start getting some of the service that he really, really thrives on. Because that's really the type of forward that he is. So, here's to a better effort from the rest of the attacking group next week to get him those balls.
Yep, and I'm sure it will be quite a scene. Highmark Stadium, the first match of the season. The fans are excited. Get going, get back to those sellout level crowds, and I think the excitement, people just can't wait. So looking forward to that. We'll have plenty to preview and look forward to on Pittsburgh Soccer Now. Colton, thanks for joining me. We will have full coverage from Highmark next week. I believe Rachel Krieger and Ed Thompson will be out there in person. I'll be supporting that coverage as well, and it should be a great way to start the season with two consecutive home games to wrap up March for the Hounds. All right, thanks Colton for joining me, and we'll sign off here now on a post game reaction show that ends in a 2-0 loss for the Riverhounds. Thanks Colton for joining me.
Thank you for having me as always.
All right, thanks.